everybody. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOP-LP Newburyport and 96.3 FM on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm just delighted this morning to welcome some guests that are here to talk about a very exciting anti-racism series that we'll be launching starting in March of this year. Paula Estey is here. She's the Executive Director of the PEG Center for Art and Activism. Paula, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. And Amanda Bradbury of the YWCA's Racial Justice Initiatives is also here. Amanda, welcome. Thanks for coming to the morning show. And our guest who would have been here, who is also an important part of planning this series, is Eddie Carson, Dean of Multicultural Education at the Governor's Academy. Well, Paula and Amanda, I was hoping that you could start just by talking a bit about how this anti-racism series came together, how the three of you came to collaborate on this, how you generated the idea, and what made you decide that this was a good time for our community to launch into this series.
That's a good question. I'll start, but then Amanda will take over. In early January, I reached out to Amanda and Ann, who I had worked with last year on a Uvalde project. And last year in February, Amanda and Ann took their kids at the after-school program through a series of making love letters for Uvalde for their anniversary, and it was just an incredible experience for the PEG Center and I think for the children as well. And so we formed a relationship then. And so in January, I reached out to Amanda and asked if she wanted to start a conversation with me about what we might next do together. And honestly, because of the YWCA's mission to be an anti-racist organization and to spread anti-racism, that's sort of where our conversation landed. And interestingly, as we talked over the weeks that we met, I think that we came to not a dead end, but a place where we know what has to be done, but we don't know how to get there in our very white and very affluent community. Eddie Carson's name came up, and I reached out to him, and interestingly, he was working on a talk called Being Black in White Spaces, and so it just, we started to run right from there. So he launches the series on March 5th with his lecture and Q&A, and then we have several programs to follow. But I would love to hear from Amanda about how it struck you when we first started to meet. Like, we knew we were going to land on anti-racism, and somehow our community conversations really became a big part of that.
It did. I think that, so recently, a little over a year ago, I became the chair of our Racial Justice Committee at the YWCA. I'm also the Director of Youth Services. So I do all kinds of things with kids, school-age kids, so kindergarten and up. And I think that coming into the conversation, as you said, we were talking, and it kind of hit like a place where we felt a little stifled by how we were going to progress and go forward. And the idea of how do we create something, how do we create an event that's not just an event, but actually would engage people, folks here in the community, to really do a little bit of self-reflection on where they are in their own social justice journeys, and see if we could actually impact action steps that would be noticeable, that there would be noticeable change towards this concept of increasing diversity here in the community. And then leaning in on, well, you know, how are we going to do that, and how are we each going to bring our piece to that table, which of course pushed me into why I definitely want to bring kids and families into that, which is what brought me into bringing my piece that's going to happen out in April, that conversation piece. And then I think from there we sort of leaned in on where the other pieces were, and Eddie actually was the one who said, oh, we got to make sure we have one just for businesses. And in May, that's going to be the one where we really sort of target the city and the businesses and things that are here in the city. And so I feel like for me, I'm really excited. It's going to be very well rounded in the way that these community conversations are going to happen, and the way that we're going to engage all sections of the population here in Newburyport.
And you know, we made sure that the various community conversations that follow that lecture on March 5th sort of give a broad stance but educate people. So and we're trying to bring we're trying to bring it into a conversation mode so that people do not feel like they're being lectured to or given this information, but actually part of the conversation that may help actions happen in our city, and that's what the whole point of it is. So in May, the last event is really like, okay, with all of the education, with all of the understanding that we now have from this series, what are we as a city going to do and commit to? It's a big, we're going to be asking our city to make a commitment to anti-racism, which Ed is teaching us is very different from being a non-racist. Being an anti-racist really stands for something, and we're going to ask our community to do that.
Well, to be an anti-racist to me suggests a regular practice rather than an attitude or a set of values that you might hold privately, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think that what you're after is something, if I'm understanding you both, and correct me if I'm not, but something more ambitious. You really want to change how people behave and how they engage with the goal of actively becoming anti-racist. And that is so important and challenging, though, too, because it means you have to think about, as you clearly have been thinking about, how do you sustain something that can be delivered as information, as stories, as insights, even illuminations in a one-time event or lecture that could have, as things can have, a deep emotional impact on people, and that's really important. But what's the next step?
That's the
how do you
hardest part.
take that illumination, those insights, the goodwill that you can generate through an inspiring speaker? And if Eddie Carson is anything, he's an inspiring speaker, for sure. And how do you then engage people's will to change, and how do you help guide them with what each of us as individuals can bring to creating a powerful community that then looks different, behaves different from what it did prior to your Krobin. And that's ambitious, and it's wonderful.
It's a big ask. It is a big ask because we are set in our ways. I mean, this is as much for me individually as it is for me professionally. It really is, because my life is a reflection of where I live in a lot of ways, and where I live is mirrored back as white, affluent. There's not a lot of diversity, as Amanda brought up to me in one of our meetings. We don't have businesses that are owned by people of color. This is a big ask, but we have to start somewhere. And there's so much going on too. I mean, we think a lot of it has to do with affordable housing, and there's a housing coalition that is on fire right now, and so. You know, there's a lot happening. There's a lot of good people doing good work. We just want to push the needle a little bit further.
Well, I think often people have the goodwill, the intention to do more, do better, but don't really know how. And it's interesting because I was listening to a webinar by a professor at Bridgewater College who studies the behavior of youth voters. I'm going to try and have her on the show because it was really interesting. And she says that she approaches the challenge not from what makes them not vote, which famously they don't do enough of, but what are the factors that encourage young people to vote. And I think the most interesting she said that stuck with me after the webinar was they get asked to vote. People ask them to vote. And that makes a huge difference. It's so simple, but it would not have occurred to me that that was the missing link. And so possibly what people need when they reach that stuck, kind of that plateau place you were talking about earlier, is somebody has to ask them to do something. And probably the more specific you are about what you ask them to do, because I think to draw out the analogy here, once you vote, I mean, I love voting. It's an adrenaline pump for me. It always has been. Once you vote, and you feel what it's like to vote, I suspect that the idea is that it becomes a lifetime habit then, and hopefully some of the things that you're going to ask people to do, as you learn what to ask them to do, and that's part of what you've designed here as your process, to bring a lot of minds together, to have a conversation about what should we be asking ourselves and one another to do, then it does more easily slip into becoming a habit and a practice. So anyway, bravo.
What I most love about this series is that it begins with a concept and an education about being black in white spaces. That's Eddie. So to me, that opens the door to the conversation about asking people to do something. First, we need to know what we don't know.
Yes.
And most of us do not know what it is like to be a person of color in a white community. We don't because we're white. So I think it's a perfect launch to a series like this that really will open our minds, but also open our hearts to what we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's actually the first conversation. The title of the first conversation is What We Don't Know.
Yeah. Well, so part of the design then is to start with Eddie's talk, being black and white spaces. I think the subtitle there is a brave lecture.
Yes. A brave talk on racism,
a brave talk
I think
for
it is.
racial justice.
I don't have my
I
notes.
wrote it down. A brave talk
exactly
for
correct.
racial
Oh, good.
justice. And yeah, that is, Newburyport is, I think, a well-intended community,
Yeah,
very
me too.
progressive in most ways, but we're very, very white, and we're very, very expensive. And that makes it more challenging to invite diverse voices in, not just to speak to the community, but to live within the community and to bring that presence and that point of view and those voices to bear. And so I think that I totally expect that will be
Yes.
illuminating.
And you know, what's been so fantastic about this is that both Amanda and Anne have very different experiences that most people in Newburyport have. Amanda lives in Haverhill, so she has a whole different visual and cultural landscape there. And Anne, grew up in Worcester and worked in
New York City,
Boston,
yeah.
and so
Yeah.
she has a lot more experience culturally and racially than most of us in Newburyport.
Like you said, it's a different landscape to the communities that we were raised in. It didn't
Yeah.
feel the same way that it feels here in Newburyport, for sure.
Must be shocking.
Been working here for over 20 years, so not shocking so much, but I will say that when I came down and I first started working here in Newburyport, one of the first things I did was I asked people who I had been working with previously, who I really enjoyed working with, to come work with me. And one of those people was black, one of my close friends who had been working with me. And having her work alongside me here in Newburyport back in 2007 was a little shocking. If we walked down the street or went somewhere, I would notice how many
Yeah.
people did a double
Oh,
take at the
yeah.
two of us. And I remember at one point I actually said to her, I said, "Is it me? Why are people looking at us? Do you think they recognize us?" She said, "No, it's because I'm black."
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, you're right, it is. And then I started noticing, oh my gosh, there isn't anybody here who's black. You really are the only black person here with me.
That was 2007. This
That
is
was like
2024, and I don't know that
2007.
it's changed that much.
Right.
Correct.
So, yeah.
But that part was the most shocking, I think, even more so, because I don't think I necessarily considered it quite as much as I did until creating it. And that was one of the things I really wanted. I really believe that for the YWCA, it's important to have a diverse staff.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I've always strived for as well, is to bring diversity in any way we can, including right from the
Yeah.
top down, people that are working here with kids.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk more about how you've designed this, because it's a months-long series. Starts in Tuesday, March 5th at 6:30 at the UU Church on Pleasant Street. And then it's going to lead to what you've referenced as the community conversations that will follow over the next 2 months. And they will all be at the Peg Center on
Yes.
Harris Street, and those will also start at 6:30. And so the first one, What We Don't Know, will be led by Eddie and other BIPOC voices. And so what are your hopes for what that first conversation might lead to, what we don't know? So as we learn what we don't know.
That's a good one.
Or even identify what
So
we need
that's
to learn.
March 21st. All the community conversations are on Thursday nights, and they're once a month, so to speak, mostly. For me, what I hope out of the first conversation is going to be a new understanding of the landscape. A reality check on the landscape that we have, and this, I mean, for me, it's always emotional as well as intellectual. I want my heart to open. So I'm really interested in hearing from people of color what their experiences have been like, because it's not mine. It will open all of us to a new way of looking at things, and I think that's the first step to change. And I'm sure Amanda will.
That was the first word that popped into my head too.
Yeah.
Is this is where we open that door.
Yep.
Really, you know, this is where if we can open that door and people are open to hearing.
Yep.
That's how we're going to get them to go take these action steps with us.
Yep.
Is
Yep.
we have to get them openly to really listen and understand that there is a different perspective than what they feel. They might not be feeling a lot of racism here in the community as a white person here in the community, and so it might not be as much of a priority. I think that's going to change, hopefully, the way that they prioritize what they do and what they're willing to do by listening to these other perspectives and seeing real people. They're going to be able to connect to actual people telling us what they actually experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we designed these community conversations not to know the answer in advance, but to really, you know, part of what the PEG Center is trying to do and pivoting slightly this year in order to do that is to listen more carefully and to open our doors to what is of concern to other people and what is happening in their lives and what they want to focus on instead of imposing our activism on them. So we're going to go into these conversations pretty you know, unscripted, to say the least. Let's see what comes out. Let's see what bubbles to the surface and what our priorities as a community are, and then we'll take that. Then the next one, the second one, is going to be so fantastic because it's going to be family oriented. Amanda and Ann will lead that on April 18th, and about talking to your families about race. And I'd love Amanda to explain also the beautiful art project.
Yeah, we're going to bring an exhibit with us. One, just because I think it'll be really awesome for people to see what we're already doing here in the community with kids, but also just as an example to families of what you could be doing. And so we're gonna basically, in our program, we run curriculum through all year long over at the after school program for the YWCA here at the Bres. And what will be happening in March is we'll be doing one of those curriculums, which I call the Colors Like Me. And basically it's a first conversations with kids about racism, and it kind of starts over in a more science place of skin and explaining skin and how your skin works and why you have it and the melanin and how each of us have the amount of melanin that would go with where we're originally from, where your ancestors came from, how close they were to the equator would sort of dictate how much melanin you have, what your skin looks like. And then it sort of tips over the other way and kind of gets into, you know, the idea of categorizing things and how, as humans, we categorize everything. And where did we first come up with this category of race? Yeah. Where did that come from? What was it meant to do? And how we use that. And then it switches over even further into racism and explaining how having this category is what allowed us to move over and create racism. And then sort of goes in with kids just on being able to identify racism and sort of the concept that the only way to change it is to recognize it first. So if we don't notice all of the implicit ways that there is racism in our society today, we would never have the chance to make a change. And so going into that piece with the kids too. And the exhibit basically comes all the way through the whole thing. It'll have artwork showing the kids making recipes for their own skin colors. It'll show
so cool.
self-portraits. Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's amazing. We take all these different skin-toned paints, and the kids will name them. I always let them pick. Sometimes they'll be like, let's name them after food. So we'll have all these nice names, like, you know, this one's peaches and cream, and this is
hummus.
Yes. Yes. And then basically they'll actually attempt to add dots of the paints to their hands until it's completely invisible, tallying.
That's what we do with makeup.
Yeah, exactly. To get their exact match, exactly. And then coming up with these amazing recipes and showing just how diverse each of our skin tones actually is and how it's more like a fingerprint than anything that can be categorized as black and white. And
they're going to do self-portraits.
Self-portraits will come
and then
up
we'll
the back
show
end
them
as
at the
well.
PEG Center Center during April. It's very cool.
And we'll try to get some other pieces too. We'll do some photography during the event. We'll probably
explanation
for sure of the conversations and things that come out. And I have books and things that I'll use with the kids as well. But it's a really fun curriculum.
Brilliant.
You know, if we start with an open conversation with people of color, and then we move into an open conversation about how to talk to your kids about racism, which will affect families, and then we end with literally we're asking the mayor, city councilors, business people to come and sit down with us. Like, all right, what's our commitment? And the commitment will have grown out of all these other things that we're doing.
I love that project.
Isn't it great?
It is. It is brilliant because what you've done is in a very practical, immediate, artistic way. You've deconstructed the concept of race without using that kind of academic-sounding language.
Yeah.
You just do it with paint.
Yeah, it's great.
And the history, and you kind of sort of create the understanding in a very. When I say simple, I'm being respectful because sometimes the truth is very simple.
Yeah.
And when you can hit that level of truth, you can really reach just about anybody. And I just think that's really brilliant. I'm curious to find out, what do the children say after they've gone through this? How do they talk to you about
every
what
year's
they...
different, and so like some of these kids are with me for like 4 years, so they'll go through these curriculums with me many times. Not always, I don't always do the same one back to back, but they might have gone through this 2 years ago, and now they're going to do it again. And I mean, it's so funny when we get into the part where we sort of dissect racism and how it is really kind of around us. I'll have kids that will actually tell me, I don't think I'm happy that I'm white. Like, I don't like this, or they'll tell me how much they hate racism, and like for them it's so concrete. It's something that should just let's just stop.
It should not be right.
Like this should, let's just, which is always so interesting. The other thing that's super interesting is, kids are so authentic. You'll have children that would be classified as Caucasian that will tell me that they're black, and then they'll explain to me, well, I have a grandfather and he came from Israel and he's a little bit black, and so they really have a totally different idea of how they sort of categorize, and so it's really interesting to have those conversations with them. It leads to something different every single year. There's always something that a child says that blows me away every time, or something that I'm like, let's look some stuff up about that. Let's talk about that. And, they always push me further than where I thought I was going to go every single time.
And Amanda, when we did the Uvalde project, the Love Notes, I watched and heard her explain a very challenging, difficult subject to very young children in the most appropriate way that helped them understand. They came right up to it, even though it was impossible to imagine. We didn't use words like murder and massacre, but we used that Uvalde is going through a very difficult time. And I remember to this day some of those love notes that those children, in terms of their honesty, and one of the young children had lost her mother, and on her love note she said, "I know how you feel."
Yeah.
I mean, like that, most adults can't get as close to that, to their honest, hurt places. Their children are wonderful, and Amanda does a beautiful, beautiful job.
Oh, you're clearly just a natural and very creative educator.
Yeah,
because that's what education should be. And when I say educator, it's I think educators, it's a noble profession. It really is. And you talk about I know how you feel. I mean, that's how we open to change, to difference, isn't it? Through our hearts, really, more than our minds.
I was listening the other day to an activist who said, if we can't keep our hearts open, and there's no hope for change. There just isn't, because we don't care.
Right.
Anyway, sorry.
Right. No. Don't be sorry. More. Bring more. Well, I do want to learn a little bit more then about what your hopes are for the, as you call it, the grand finale. To the community conversations.
That's a big
Committing to
question
change,
mark.
becoming anti-racist together, where you're hoping to identify action items and commitments So tell us more about who you want to fold into that, because I think you mentioned businesses, I think government. So tell us about the broad range of constituent audiences in the communities you hope to engage in this, and what your thoughts and hopes are for what you want to come out of that.
Well, so Eddie's really, he's the spokesperson for businesses. He really wants businesses and our civic and political leaders to be part of this conversation. Part of, I think, what he wants to accomplish is, as a first step, some kind of signage, literally, in their businesses at City Hall that claim themselves and our city as anti-racist. For me, this is an emotional hope. I mean, I want to see huge change come. I want to be able to walk down my beautiful street and see beautiful people of color. I want to be able to walk down State Street in Newburyport and go into businesses that are not all owned by white people. Restaurants, the same. My husband and I go to Haverhill for dinner so that we're bringing money into a different community and a different culture instead of all the white guys, you know. So I think that I am as curious as all of us are about what actions we are going to come up with through this process. We as the organizers are as much a part of this organic process as we are asking other people to be. But there's money behind businesses, there's money behind banks, there's power and clout in that corner office and at City Hall that we are hoping to engage deeply in this conversation. Not from their podiums, but from the circle that we're going to gather in conversation.
From their humanity.
Yeah.
Got anything to add
I mean,
to that?
I think you're right. I think Eddie definitely would love to see like an actual written, like some sort of a written commitment that's behind those signs. That by putting this sign in, we are saying that we're going to make sure that we do these specific things. And I think beyond that, though, at least from our perspectives, I feel the same as Paula. I want to be open. Like you said, we don't really necessarily know what the next step is, and I don't want to try to guess what it should be. I know that long-term change is going to be baby steps. There's going to be baby steps to it, and that's okay. I'm totally okay with that being the way that we get there. I think that that actually will make it more sustainable. So I'm open to whatever the community sort of teaches us about what those baby steps can be.
I feel like that first conversation, drawing in people of color to tell us their experiences, will actually amplify their visibility. And like organizations like the YW and the PEG Center are always looking to expand our diversity reach, and that could be part of it. Is as we amplify and identify the people of color that live around us, let's engage them, let's hire them, let's use them. That already would change the face of so much. I'm into action, and so I'm curious about what kinds of actions, besides a declaration, that we are going to come up with, because I personally want more. I want more.
And that the community needs to buy in. So we need to make sure that all these steps need to be something that the community will buy into and do with us.
And do with us.
Yeah, it can't just be something that they put back for us. It needs to be something that we do as a community.
But amplifying and having BIPOC voices and faces become more visible to us seems like a really good place to start.
It's a good resource anyway for this community to want to start.
You know, the PEG Center is looking to have a more diverse board, and we met with a woman who does board work in Lawrence, getting people of color onto nonprofit boards. And we met with her, and she said, you know, so far, there isn't a lot of reason why a person of color from Haverhill, Lawrence, or Lowell would want to work with a nonprofit organization in Newburyport, because you are so white. And so we have work to do before we can even get to that place, I think. It was a real reality check for us. Like, what's in it for them to work on your board when the community itself is not a reflection of them? Get all fired up over this.
Yeah, well, it's in a good way. I mean, it's important to have some passion to bring to bear, because it's very hard work.
It's hard.
It's hard in almost every possible way. But among the challenges is to figure out, so what do we do?
Yeah.
Where do we, like, okay, the situation just described, you have a BIPOC person from Lawrence who's going, look at this exclusively white board in Newburyport, you know.
Old, too.
So
old and white.
how do you get more diversity when some of the diverse people that you'd want to be included are looking at you and going, you're not diverse at all, so
Yeah.
so how do you...
I know, I think
So-
they see us as a challenge. They see it as
Right.
like too much
and
of a
it
challenge
could be
for them to take on.
tokenism, or, you know,
Yeah,
like, I don't
sure.
want to be your only person of color,
Right.
you know. Mary, do you have any ideas?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think what you're doing, there's a lot of creative minds in Newburyport, and I think getting people engaged in using their creativity to brainstorm and come
Yeah.
up with,
Yeah.
and including BIPOC voices in that. I think some of it is asking, so what could we do that would make us more interesting
Yes,
to you?
exactly.
Now, isn't that an interesting frame for affluent white people to deal with? We're boring.
Well, we are one. We
We're
could be one
uninteresting.
note for sure.
As we think we're Newburyport. you know, lots of interesting, fun things going on. You know, we have the Y, we have, you know, the chamber music, and yet, okay, from your perspective, I understand we look like this kind of uniform whiteness. So, how do we become more interesting and more engaging? Not so much. I mean, it is a challenge to say, how do we open our hearts to you and connect? But how do we make you want to open your heart to us and see what diversity there might be here that doesn't show beneath our skin color? Because there is diversity in Newburyport, and not everybody in Newburyport is affluent.
Right.
And I think that it's kind of flipping the question.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
To say, rather to ask, you know, well, so what would make you more? What would you know, what could we do to be more of interest to you? Is it the kind of projects we're saying you could work on? Is it the impact we think you could have? What would make us more interesting to you? It's kind of a different question, isn't it?
Yeah. You know, what comes to mind is the Lawrence Festival for the Arts. Like, you know, it's all people of color. Let's bring them here. Let's bring that festival here. She can do it twice, once in July and once in August. I mean, I don't know. Just
And if they wanted to, if they thought that would make,
Right.
you know, so I just think that the most powerful thing to do, there's two things, I think, just in my experience. One is just keep asking questions, and
Yeah.
sometimes flip the question.
right, right.
You know, upside down or inside out. And the other one is just keep working at having relationships with people.
Yes.
Because I think ultimately what does make us be interested in other people is when we have a relationship
Yeah,
with them.
I agree.
And then we stop thinking about, you know, things like race,
Yeah.
whether it's peaches and cream or hummus. I love the hummus. Because we get to know somebody, and we are all human on the inside.
Yes.
And we get to know something about, you know, what are your passions, you know, or even more than that, people's life stories.
Yeah, what's
I think,
important?
are what
What's
really
important to you?
kind of make people connect.
Yeah.
That reminds me, if I can digress a little, I was telling you about the Bobby Gentry is the name of the professor at Bridgewater who researches the behavior of youth voters. And she said that the other thing that draws young voters in is inspiring candidates. And part of what makes candidates inspiring is when they share their life story, because young people connect to that. And I thought, isn't that interesting?
I love that.
Not just an inspiring candidate in terms of, you know, a platform, which
Yeah.
can be very dry, and people often don't bother to identify what makes your platform or your policy issue integral to the interest and the priorities of a young person. It's a missing piece we need to, I think,
Yeah.
work really much harder on. But the life story and the openness to sharing their life story.
Yeah, I think it's
How
really
did you
important.
become who you are? What makes you want to run for office? And I think there might be some things to borrow from that and thinking about how to invite in more diversity. So I think it's question asking and just building personal human relationships with people, if that makes sense.
Yes, totally,
So,
totally.
but I think it's very exciting what you're doing. And you come
We
to
do
it with,
too.
with open hearts and an interest in engaging people. And I think the other thing that makes a difference is, and that maybe this is a place for us to end for today, is both of you are clearly people who benefit in a human way and a personal way, from outreach to connecting with people who are different from you. And I think that is often a missing part of a narrative that can come sounding like it's about idealism, which is wonderful and important, but I think people respond to something that feels in a more visceral way like, yeah, this makes me happier, this makes me more fulfilled, this makes me more gratified in the life that I live. And so I wanted to ask you if you could both talk a little bit about what kind of personal gratification you find in committing yourselves to these goals.
That's a big question.
I know I don't like to make it easy for my guests.
Jeez, Mary, I think for me personally, it's everything. It's more and more over the course of my long life, I have, my true north is community and community service. It looks different for different people. I so admire the folks that show up to these housing meetings, to iRise, to writing postcards. I don't often have a lot of time to do that, but in my personal vision and goals, I want to see a community that has diversity culturally, economically, because I've never experienced that. So on a personal level, that's what I want in my life. And what keeps me going are the personal contacts and the relationships that we're building, and the business, you know, nonprofit to nonprofit understanding where we're each coming in is so gratifying to me. We're covering a lot of ground. We are covering a lot of ground, and I'm very proud of that and very grateful. I'm grateful and honored to be doing this work in a community that seems open to it.
Yeah.
So.
I can hear how just genuinely fulfilling it is for you in so many ways.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's a good fit for who you are as a person and your passions, the things that you deeply care about.
I'm a gatherer.
But it also means that you continue expanding as a human being, which is a wonderful thing in life.
I love gathering circles of people, and so and I think you do too.
I do, and I think for me too, high relationship and connection really fulfills me, and in working with the families that I've worked with, especially in the amount of time that I've been here in Newburyport, having people in my own personal life who are of color, and then coming down into Newburyport and meeting people here of color, really sort of pushed me to want to support them in being able to be a part of this community, like connecting with them and seeing what it was like for them to be here, and hearing from those kids and seeing really pushed me that the mission that we have at the YWCA is just so critical. It's critical everywhere, and it's critical in a very specific way here in Newburyport. I think it changes from community to community, and that's really what sort of drives me forward, is just really wanting, after, you know, once you connect with someone, you can't help but want to be part of their struggle and want to see them succeed. And I've been really lucky to have a lot of connections with people of color that are in Newburyport, and to have kids of color in my program, and that's something. It's not always, you know, I remember at one point when we were in the old Bresnahan before 2014 and the new building was built, I remember we had probably out of 50 kids, 6 of them were of color. I remember thinking, I think this is probably, if you looked at the entire community, we probably have a higher population. Yeah, and I thought, isn't that amazing? They're here. But then in having them here, I did see some of the challenges that the parents faced, or just how different it was for them here in the community, including, you know, a white mom and a black dad, and what that was like for them here in this community. Things like that. And they actually moved out of Newburyport. Eventually they didn't stay. I had them for 2 years, but it just wasn't as comfortable of an environment for them to be. So those types of things really sort of made me think, well, I would like to see that change. I want to see that different. I want to feel it.
And you know, as an activist, not to have that exposure or experience or availability of people of color doesn't feel right. It's not right. I mean, like, I care so deeply about that as an activist that that's what I want to see changed. Yeah.
Well, the word that comes to my mind as I hear you say that, Paula, is integrity. That you get a sense of integrity out of what you do. Integrity in the sense of pulling things together in a way that makes them make sense and cohere. And I think not to have that means that things feel more fragmented, that there are missing pieces of our community. And humanity is infinitely diverse, from hummus to chocolate to peaches and cream, and that when you're not working toward that, if I'm understanding you, it doesn't feel like life is coherent. There's not an integrity to it.
I feel like I'm in a little bubble of, like, you know, this is easy and people are really responsive, but it's not getting to the core of it yet.
So, and what I take out of what you were talking about, Amanda, is the word love kept going through my mind. That there was a lot of love invested from you in what you do and the people you want to reach out to, and love is a powerful force.
It is.
So anyway, you both, it was a hard question, but you both did beautifully. And for that reason, I'm glad I asked. And we've run out of time for today's show, but it sounds like such an important and exciting program that you're launching starting March 5th, and we should end with making sure everybody knows where they can get more information and where they can register for
I think
these.
That's my job, yes. So it's March 5th, March 21st, April 18th, and May 16th. Go to www.thepegcenter.org to register. We have a suggested donation of $10. All can happen on our website, and there's more information on our website too. We have a beautiful synopsis of all the events, and you can find it there.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and share your passion and the information about the program. It sounds really wonderful and very creative, and something that Newburyport badly needs and will benefit enormously from, both in integrity and love. So there you have it.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so
Thanks
much
for having us.
My pleasure, totally. That's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Till then, be well.